and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. For those who, this is just a big of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. This week, Dr. Brian Huffling joins us for a topic that may be out of this world. UFOs, aliens, and Christianity. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher remains to be Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
It's like, what do you call a glass coffin? It's like remains to be seen. So, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came outside, shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is Assimilation Ministries, where implanted in the body is not just a slogan. Assimilation Ministries. Our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Dr. Brian Huffling, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. I don't know if I checked the little box that makes the audio work. You're going to tell me if it doesn't, aren't you, Don?
Well, so far it's working.
Well, I mean, talking about, okay, you'll tell me. Notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it, or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear. This webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. So here's the part where if I didn't press the button, you won't hear it. Our fake applause for Dr. Brian Huffling. You hearing it? Okay, good. All right. Yes, you can sit down now. Okay, yes, everybody. We used to have fake applause. Now we just have fake applause.
Now we just have fake applause.
Yeah,
so
I used to go like this. That had to do.
In the world. Dr. Huffling, I am sorry for all of the weirdness that happened in advance. My computers, as you know, got all glitched up. And
I understand completely.
Right, and they were. I think they were impacted by aliens trying to prevent.
I'm
Sounds
sure
about right. Yep.
They don't want this program to
I think that's
to
true.
go. We don't air the programs, but whatever.
So, Dr. Huffling, now that you have deigned to join us, who are you and
what's my line? You can sign in there.
I'm Brian Huffling. I'm a professor at Southern Evangelical Seminary. I was a student there for a number of years. I have my master's degree and Ph.D. from there. I'm a Air Force chaplain in the reserves. Let's see. What else would be pertinent, I guess, to this?
You're a friend of Marsha Montenegro's.
I do know Marsha. Yes, she was a student at school, and we've done some conferences together. She's spoken at where we were with West Virginia, I guess, together. She did, I think, New Age type stuff, which is her specialty. She's a really great resource to have. I'm glad she's on our side now.
Yeah, she is very good. And in fact, that disclaimer at the beginning is because of her, because whenever she's on, we have her on quite often. And we did a book on the Enneagram together. We do a lot of stuff together.
Right.
But every time she's on, she always says, I have nothing to do with the satire. So we said, okay, she doesn't have a sense of humor. So.
Well, it's important to have fun. So I'm glad you do.
Yeah, we do. So what got you interested in UFOs?
I've always been interested in the night sky. Even since middle school, I wanted to get a telescope and just, learn the sky, look at things. A few years ago, when I was at the Air Force Academy, I started reading Ron Rhodes' book on the truth about aliens and UFOs. And it was interesting. It was about the cults and that kind of thing. And I like Ron. Ron was one of my professors when I was in seminary. And then I read Hugh Ross's book, Ken Samples and Mark Clark, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. And what really interested me there with that was you've got a lot of non-Christian researchers like Jacques Vallée, J. Allen Hynek, John Keel, and others who are saying very similar things that Christians are saying.
Right.
And so that piqued my interest. So I started reading Vallée, and he was just really interesting with his research. So I kept reading him, and then started reading Hynek. And for my research project, sort of like a thesis in the Air Force, I have a master's degree with the Air Force I just finished last year. I did UFOs, or they call them UAP, and national security. So I have I guess most people have an interest in this, as you can tell from the news going on now and all the stories coming out. And so I'm just a little bit more OCD than most, I guess, and wanted to become a researcher at this topic and just have fun with it. So, yeah.
So why do you think the government changed the name from UFO to UAP?
That's really ironic, because they coined the term UFO. Back in 1947, we started hearing about flying saucers. That became a pejorative term. And so Edward Ruppelt, who headed Project Blue Book, and even a little before then, coined the term UFO. He could actually call them UFO. UFOs, they're pronounced like that. And so that became a pejorative term. And so I think the government wanted to get away from this kind of sensationalistic, negative aspect of being associated with UFOs and all the weirdness with that.
Well,
so they coined the term UAP.
What a good job they've done getting away from sensationalism by releasing all those Navy videos. Isn't that
exactly? Yeah. They
can
have.
tell they really don't want to sensationalize this issue. Yeah.
That's right. But the term, I mean, it's a distinction without a difference. It doesn't mean anything different than UFO.
What does it stand for? I forget.
It can mean a couple things. One is unidentified aerial phenomena or unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Oh, so it doesn't have to be aerial.
It's normally aerial, but I've seen both used.
Okay. I mean, when they say anomalous, does that mean it could be like underwater instead? So we could have like the movie The Abyss.
Well, they have USO, which are unidentified submerged objects, which are the same thing really as UFOs. It just can go on. And of course, as you mentioned, the Navy videos, they talk about this so-called tic-tac thing, and being underwater, and then unsubmerging and being transmedium and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot there in that regard.
Okay.
So we're kind of on the brief history now, so we can talk a little bit about that. What is some of the, and we have an article which we can show to folks that, and the link is in the description panel as well. Present screen. This will take me a second because my fingers move slow. There we go. And the article is UFOs, Aliens, and Christianity. UFOs, Aliens, and Christianity. It's online, and you can get the link in the description panel, so you'll know what we're talking about. Maybe better than I will ever know. So the brief history. You started on it. What is the brief history of UFOs?
Well, in the article, I started with, as most people do, with Kenneth Arnold. The history of UFOs, if you read people like Vallée and Chris Auerbach and different people, it really goes back as far back as history does. We have accounts of hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, of people seeing things in the sky. Even here in the U.S., you have people who've been seeing things since the 1500s. But normally, the modern day UFO saucer stuff started with Kenneth Arnold in 1947. There were airships in the 1890s. But most people start this discussion with Kenneth Arnold. There were sightings in Europe during World War II with, say, the Foo Fighters, which are little orbs of light that were kind of pacing the aircraft of the Allies.
So that's not an alternative rock band. That's an actual thing. Foo
Fighters. It may be that too. Yeah. I have heard of the Foo Fighters. So yeah.
I never heard of it. I only heard of the alternative rock band. I never heard of why are they called Foo Fighters?
Why are the UFO things called Foo Fighters?
Yeah.
It's my understanding of, I forgot what the word means, but if memory serves, it was a French word, and I forgot what the actual term means. I need to go back and look that up. They didn't know what they were. They actually first thought that they were the Axis powers, the Germany and whatever, trailing them, but then they found out that they were having the same problems. So that was one issue. Ghost rockets in the Scandinavian countries of people seeing what were apparently rocket ships, but they weren't really of the normal kind of phenomena that you would see with that. And then, so after the detonation of the atomic bombs, 1945, many people say, well, the aliens showed up to warn us about using that kind of technology. Because
there was a movie like that, wasn't there? There was The Day the Earth Stood Still, right?
Yeah, lots of weird movies. And actually, interestingly, some of that is intentional to desensitize people. At least that's what we hear from even the CIA.
Of course.
Now we have unclassified documents from, say, the Robertson panel of 1953, who wanted to enlist Hollywood and even Disney to desensitize the public regarding UFOs, so it wouldn't be such a big deal.
And the fact that nobody has borne witness to this is just more evidence that it's true, right?
Borne witness to what now?
The fact that there are no what do you call it, leakers, or people who are on the inside who have. There's a word I'm looking for, but the fact that nobody's come out and exposed it from the inside just is more proof that it's such a good.
Exposed that there's not any, or that there are any.
That there are.
Yeah. Yeah. We have. I guess you pronounce his name Garush, the guy that came out of the news a week or two ago, saying that they have, and they've been saying this for a while. We have craft, we have bodies, this, that, and the other. I've had a lot of questions about that because I have a lot of stuff on my channel. And so we have people talking, and people say, well, what do you think about this? Well, it's interesting. It's really interesting. He's going to Congress about it. But the proof is in the pudding. We'll have to stand by and see if there actually is anything, because as of right now, it's just him making assertions.
And this is he's the first one I can think of who's, it sounds really X-Files to me. Mm-hmm. So he just had, it's like watching a rerun of the X-Files. This is like Fox Mulder on TV,
Yeah, there have been certain people in the past who have said, well, I've worked on, like Bob Lazar. I've worked or seen people at Area 51 working on UFOs and various things. There's not been any hard and fast evidence of that. It's just been talk and speculation.
What was his position?
Bob Lazar, or the new guy?
The new guy.
That he had seen technology. Basically, the claim is that we have been reverse engineering kind of the craft.
Was he an employee of?
Yeah, he claimed to have been involved in Area 51 and worked and seen all the stuff going on there. So we have that. That's a little bit later addition to the UFO phenomena. So it started in 47, and then that was in July. In June or late July, we have Roswell, and that's a whole another issue. That was the first major one about, well, is it the government first said it was a disc, and then said, well, no, it wasn't a disc, it was a weather balloon. Then in the 1990s, they came out saying, well, it was a spy balloon. We're trying to track the USSR's use of atomic weaponry.
So were H.G. Wells and Jules Verne novels part of the cover-up?
You want them to be?
Were they part of the desensitization program?
No. Well, not that I know of. Yeah, not that I know of.
Oh, okay, just checking.
And then, so what has really interested me in this is kind of the historical aspect of the Air Force. I like the military aspect. I'm in the military, have been for a while. And so in the late 40s, because of all these things going on, there were three classics that are referred to, instances that were referred to as the classics. You got a pilot actually that started chasing a UFO, and he died in the chase. We've got people chasing another pilot chasing about a 6 to 8 inch, according to him, light that was dancing around the sky and flying around. And you've got 2 airline pilots who claim to have seen a UFO fly past them. And so the Air Force, actually in 47, before it became the Air Force, it was the Army Air Corps still. And then in 47, it became the Air Force. As soon as they became the Air Force, they were embroiled in all this UFO stuff. So they had these projects like Project Sign, Project Grudge, and then Project Blue Book, which is the most well-known one that lasted for 20 years. And so in the 50s and 60s, you have various cases and accounts of things going on with there we go with sightings in the military and in the population. We have, of course, the famous incidents where you have UFOs sighted over certain Air Force bases, where after the sighting or at the same time of the sighting, their nuclear missiles went offline. And you have all kinds of different and interesting sightings. Some were more individuals seeing, some were groups. And of course, then we have the abduction phenomena happening with Betty and Barney Hill and Travis Walton.
Yeah, that was big.
And his list just goes on, and have some of my favorite ones. My favorite one is the Bent Waters one in 1980. You have the Phoenix Lights 1997. There's a lot of things, and of course you have the new stuff with the Navy that has been leaked in 2017 that showed videos taken in 2004, and there's more in 2015. And of course, there's an even now. And what's really interesting is that we now have this the government coming out and having these public studies. We had the first congressional hearing last year since Project Blue Book. So it's been interesting. A lot been going on, and so it just gets more and more fun as the days go by.
Now, what are the nature of the UFO sightings? What kinds of things we're talking about? Because as I was talking with someone yesterday, they said, well, what kind of sightings are you talking about? And I said, well, probably 95% of them are explainable with natural phenomena. So what are the sightings that we have?
Yeah, the overwhelming majority can be explained naturally, whether it's at weather or I don't know how, but Venus. People who I guess you don't see the stars or planets very much. When they do see it, they make mistaken for a UFO. But there are typically, and J. Allen Hynek, who was the astronomer who worked with the Air Force, came up with certain classifications. You may have heard the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh yeah. So
when I was doing another show with somebody, he's like, that was the real thing. Yeah, that Hynek devised this classification. So you've got, for example, daylight discs, which are what you would see in the day, which would be a flying saucer or a disc that you would see. Something in the daytime. That's daylight discs. Nocturnal lights, which are just that. They're lights you see at night. And I've had people, I know people who've seen these. They can just be looks like a bright star going, or it could be something that's much brighter, much faster. But something you would see at night, for example, radar visual, which would be radar hits or painting on a radar that would show a craft of some sort or a blip of something on the radar. Then you have the close encounter spectrum, and for Hynek, he only went through 3. Close encounters of the first kind, which is where you have a visual sighting of a UFO relatively close to you, but you don't see anything else besides the craft. The second kind is where you have physical effects, where it's tree branches, radiation, a car, and typically if you're in a car, they have the electronics go off in the car. The close kinds of the third kind is where you actually see occupants of some sort. And then beyond that, beyond Hynek, there's been other classifications like the fourth kind. You're seeing orbs, for example. If you're familiar with Skinwalker Ranch, this is something I've been researching more recently. People will see orbs or little balls of light that show up.
So that's like not a nudist colony.
Skinwalker Ranch. No, this is a ranch in northeastern, you can say eastern, I guess, Utah, that supposedly was cursed by Native Americans, and I can't remember which tribe it was. It was the Utes or the I forgot which one put the curse on it. But it's supposed to be cursed and have skinwalkers, which is basically a shapeshifter. And people have claimed to see UFOs there, all these orbs of light, weird things. There's a show on it. There's books on it, very recent books. Bob Bigelow, who is a well-known pioneer in UFO studies, who is a billionaire, bought the ranch in 1996, and they performed scientific studies. And one thing they looked at was electromagnetic type stuff. And this is what the show does as well, Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. And so this third kind is where you have these kinds of physical effects going on, like different kind of radiation or electromagnetic spectrum type stuff. Giving off different readings. The fourth kind is where you would have abductions. So you'd have like Betty and Barney Hill in the 60s, Travis Walton, 1975, these famous abduction cases. So if you're abducted or have some experience like that, then that would be a close encounter of the fourth kind. And then the fifth kind would be the individual suffers some kind of harm or even death because of the incident.
So the film Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind was a documentary, right?
Wasn't the third? Wasn't the film titled Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Spielberg's was the third kind. There actually is a documentary called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind by Stephen Greer, who is, if you know him, he's a very much of a more of the New Age ilk.
Okay.
And talks about the Eastern connections. And he claims that we're actually in contact with aliens, working with aliens underground and doing various things. But he also has a very spiritualistic New Age kind of take on it as well.
Now, did J. Allen Hynek, I'm trying to figure out whether he became a believer or not.
A believer in UFOs?
Yeah.
Yes, he did. He started off as a skeptic and wanted to debunk. And my understanding is the Air Force wanted him to look at the cases and also wanted to debunk. So Project Grudge, which was a project before Blue Book, became really a debunking project. And even Blue Book became, as many people know, it was more of a public relations kind of thing. So he went from not believing to believing. He's written a good bit on that. His view has changed. He's famous for saying, well, what you're seeing really is swamp gas or something like that. And then he actually changed his position because he just couldn't explain it. And he couldn't explain the phenomena. And he didn't think they were aliens. He actually thinks, contrary to what many people believe, which is, again, interesting. What got me interested in this discussion is Vallée, Keel, Hynek, people who were really at the highest levels of this don't think they're aliens. Hynek thought there was some kind of a psychic aspect to it where they could materialize, but they weren't really aliens per se.
Okay.
There was Carl Sagan's theory. One of his theories was that the aliens are us.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah.
And he believes that perhaps in the future we'll invent a way to sort of time travel, but in a way that they won't actually be able to come back here, but they'll be able to observe, and whatever technology they're using to observe creates these floating images in the sky.
Right.
And when we see them, we're seeing us in the future somehow. that was one of his ideas.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, and Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind is context such as abductions. And I saw it. I went, okay, Wesley Strieber, first name that comes to mind. Who, believes he was abducted. And I think that's an interesting way to put it because he doesn't state exactly how this works. In fact, it says that he doesn't even draw any conclusions about the identity of his alleged abductors. He's not really sure. But in his story, as he tells it, he woke up seemingly paralyzed, and a neurologist suggested that that's been mistaken by some for an intervention by demons or aliens. So it could be demons, even from a psychologist standpoint.
Yeah, there have been people who this is interesting because people who are not Christian, I'm not sure whether the psychologist is Christian or not, but other theories that really are at least similar and consistent with what we're saying. And it's interesting about Strieber with his books, Communion and Transformation. He doesn't know, he says, if these things were malevolent or not, but he wants to kind of go along with them and kind of seek after them. And they will, if someone's gonna kidnap you basically and terrorize you and your family, that's probably malevolent for the most part.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and there have been cases where I know you had Joe Jordan on a few months ago, where in his book, Piercing the Cosmic Veil, says that you've got people who are being witnessed as they're undergoing these kind of abductions, and they don't go anywhere. They kind of lose consciousness and they have a psychological experience. Then you've got people like Travis Walton. His is the weird case for me. 1975, Arizona. He is a lumberjack with about 6 other people. And they're out in the woods, and they're done for the day. They head back, and they see what they think is a fire in the woods, and they head over there, and they see what they claim is a UFO. And so Travis, against their wishes, he gets out of the truck, runs over to it, gets hit with a beam. They say it kind of picked him up, and they just took off. So they come back. He's nowhere to be found. The UFO is gone. He's gone for 5 days. They're suspected of his murder. 5 days later, he shows back up. And he says he was abducted. He has all these tests done. They undergo all these polygraphs. They pass the polygraphs. There was one that was inconclusive. And so his case, he still stands by, and they stand by that this is a real event where he was taken by aliens.
How many empty beer cans were in the back of their truck? That's what I
don't know. But yeah, so either we have a case where they're all lying, and they're fairly young, they're in their early 20s from what I can remember. They're all lying, they're all mistaken, or something really happened. And so we have to, because the sheriff polygrapher who they brought in for this was the best one to say it. So they believe the kids they believe the kids believe their own story.
Now, when I heard that Jimmy Carter saw a UFO, that just killed the whole thing for me right there.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, because Louis Farrakhan also believes in UFOs and has this interesting teaching that says that they are hovering over all of the major cities.
Well, didn't he have a close encounter of the 12th kind, I think?
Well, the way he's describing it is they're hovering over these cities. They will take all the blacks out of the cities and then wipe out everything, all of the life on the planet. And
does this have anything to do with a comet coming through? No, that was somebody else.
I don't know.
But like the rapture.
Ted Koppel one night, and Ted Koppel asked him about this.
Heaven's Gate
had also been on a UFO, and Ted Koppel asked him about it, and he said, you don't really believe in UFOs, do you? And he goes, well, even your president, Jimmy Carter, believes in UFOs. And we just had a movie come out, Independence Day. And Ted Koppel goes, that was a fantasy film. It wasn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't use that movie to demonstrate or argue for.
Especially the way it ends. Well, of course,
So Salvador asks this question: are there any similarities and occult experiences like poltergeist?
Yeah, good question.
That is a good question. And this is, again, one of the really interesting aspects of the phenomena. In fact, I got a new book not long ago. This is quoted, though, in other books I had. Earlier on in the Air Force's research, they said that what they're seeing with the UFO phenomena is very much like what they see in the occult type phenomena and spiritual aspects of it. And oftentimes it's the case where somebody has a UFO experience, and then other aspects are surrounded. So, for example, you'll see a UFO, then you'll have poltergeist type experiences, like you'll hear footsteps, you'll hear a baby crying, there's no baby in the house, you'll hear car doors shutting, there's no car doors outside being shut. You'll hear voices. They'll have, so for example, the Skinwalker Ranch thing. Some of the scientists who were reportedly investigating there, they went home. They had weird experiences at Skinwalker Ranch. They went home, and then their families started having these poltergeist type experiences where they would have they would see the orbs. They would see shadowy figures in their bedrooms. They have this kind of what's called bedroom visitations, which is very, very common in these kinds of, especially the close encounter aspects of the phenomena. Mm-hmm. They would hear things. They would have physical responses. They would have rashes and things on their bodies. And then some would even report having wine bottles just go flying off the shelf across the room. So yeah, there's a lot of connection between seeing UFOs, especially if you're seeing them more in the close encounter. I haven't heard as many say this if they're just seeing the daylight discs or the nocturnal lights, but the closer they get to you, the more poltergeist type things follow.
Poltergeist.
It does go hand in hand a lot of times.
Well, there's always the evangelistic aspect of UFOs. And one of our sponsors addresses that kind of a thing.
Well, sort of, yeah. They have some questions for us. Are churches getting a little too individualistic for your tastes? Do you often wish it wasn't so hard to fit in with the new Christians you meet? Would you rather be part of a collective than a uniquely gifted member of a fellowship? Well, now you can find freedom from the hassles of having your own personal identity with Assimilation Ministries. Their pastoral staff is ready to relieve you of the burden of being yourself. No need to choose a new identity. They choose it for you. And all their assimilations come with their trans-lifetime guarantee. Satisfaction is irrelevant. Assimilation Ministries, where implanted in the body is not just a slogan. You need to check them out. Some people just don't want to be themselves. So there you see them at Trekkie conventions and other places, but
Yeah, for sure.
now there's an actual ministry. So
It's interesting, Salvador's the question on similarities with poltergeist. You're talking about abductions and things some years back. I don't know if you have any recollection of this, but in the 1990s, one of the popular things that was plaguing Christian counselors and non-Christian psychologists was something called repressed memory syndrome. For Christians, it was demonic in the sense that they were claiming that they were having memories of having been young women who were impregnated. They had given birth in the church basements and sacrificed their babies on altars, and no evidence for any of this. On the psychological front, it was child molestation and other claims which proved to be untrue. And yet, evidence was not required. It was simply having this memory that came up. So, are memories reliable as sources? Could something have happened, which we're saying yes, but it probably is spiritual and probably not physical beings from other planets?
Yeah, so our memory is reliable. Yeah, if there's a memory of an objective thing that happened, I would say in principle memories can be are reliable. But what you're saying wouldn't be a memory per se; it would be an implanted thought, I guess, by the psychology. And this is why um, hypnosis is a very controversial aspect of all this, because it's so suggestive, and the hypnotist can implant, if they're not careful, these. And this is, if you brought up Communion or Whitley Strieber. One of the things that, and I just listened to this not long ago in my car. I have Audible and I drive back and forth to base them out with the Air Force and different places. So I listen to Audible books. Well, in listening to this book, I can almost feel his panic and his paranoia, because a lot of the book is trying to figure out what happened. He's not trying to argue this is what happened. He doesn't even know, as you mentioned, and he's not sure, is the psychologist planting this in me? Are these real entities? Or am I going crazy? So the hypnotherapy is a very controversial aspect of all this. We see this with Betty and Barney Hill. We see this with various people. And the question is to what degree is the therapist
influencing, right?
These influencing, causing, implanting, whatever, these memories, and how much of it is real? And that becomes very controversial. And people can do this who really aren't even qualified to be doing hypnotherapy and that kind of thing. So Valet and others who are legitimate ufologists, they don't discount hypnosis completely, but they say it's very dangerous. It's just not a great way to go about examining the data, because it's so subjective and it's so. In fact, people have supposedly have these thoughts implanted when they weren't even going in there about these UFO experiences. They would try to experiment and say, well, what can I get this person to believe? And they would come out believing they were abducted.
Well, there's a lot of controversy that it's kind of interesting to me. We got into this ministry because my wife wanted to reach Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
And after several years of working in ministry to those sorts of things, one of our branch directors, the former JW, would have monthly gatherings of ex-JWs and families of JWs and that sort of thing. And about that time, the repressed memory syndrome became very popular. And so that became Joy's second biggest researched phenomena, because it was destroying so many people.
Yeah.
And as she did that, I was going after a particular point. Oh, suggestibility. That's what it was. And how that when you go, say you're a 35-year-old female, you're having issues with, I don't know, eating or something like that, and you go in and they start talking you through, and suddenly you recover a memory of something that happened when you were 4 or whatever. Well, a friend of mine, late Bob Passantino, was talking to a psychologist who advocated for this. He believed it was all true. And he said, well, I have a case that will prove that it is true. I said, okay. He said, I have two women that I'm counseling. One lived in California, one lived in New York. And they each came to me and they had memories of in the Second World War have being abducted by the Roman Catholic Church at separate times. They never even met each other. They never talked about this. Were flown to the Vatican where they were sexually molested by the Pope and then brought back. That's the Second World War. Okay. And he says, so how do you demonstrate that that is false? There's no connection between them. They never met. How is it that their stories are so identical? And Bob looked at him and said, well, there is a connection. And he said, what's the connection? He goes, you are the connection.
So what does he mean by that?
He means he is the one who led him into believing that they had been abducted.
And he was a hypnotherapist?
Pardon?
He was a hypnotherapist?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting point. He would be the connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. So Bob McGuire says, without a doubt, it's the deception is fallen angels. In the scientific community, these experiences taking these is the scientific community taking these experiences similar? If not, what do they make of these people's testimonies under polygraph? If so, is science today post-materialistic? Boy, those are three big questions.
Yeah. It depends on who you're talking to. In general, the scientific community was reluctant. If you read people like Hynek, for example, who was getting into this back in the 40s and 50s, they were very reluctant to get into this. But they were forced to because there were just so many accounts and so much phenomena going on that you really couldn't just sweep it under a rug. And some scientists wanted to go along and just follow the data wherever it led, and some scientists didn't. And so scientists like Edward Condon, for example, the Condon Committee in 1967, tried to get Blue Book shut down, and the Blue Book commissioned them to do a study, and they tried to get it shut down. Today, though, and that's decades ago, some scientists believe that there is something going on that's not necessarily explainable by just nuts and bolts kind of craft. Now, Valet would be one where he's a scientist who thinks it is more of a physical phenomena, but it's not necessarily aliens.
Okay.
I think we're going to get to those different views then a little bit, so I'll hold that for a while. But some scientists don't. Some scientists are more apt to be open to the spiritual aspect. It just depends. There's not really an overarching position. It does seem that people are more and more open to, first of all, acknowledging the data, and that's, I think, the first step is that something's going on, and we have to acknowledge it. And that they didn't want to acknowledge it to begin with. Now they're pretty much being forced to. And so individually, scientists take different positions, and there's no really one size fits all. Some scientists are more like Hugh Ross, for example. He's an astronomer who thinks it's a spiritual aspect. Valet, also has a background in astronomy, thinks it's more of an interdimensional phenomena. So it just really depends. So some see a connection with the spiritual, and some see it as very much just alien. And some see it they're very skeptical, and so there's not really a one size fits all answer.
So you have four possible views that you lay out.
And there's more than that, but I give that in the article, right?
Right. And you want to go through those quickly?
Sure. So the first, if someone is presented with this data, they will generally fall into one of these categories, and there could be more. But one is just the skeptical category. Well, there's nothing to it. It's just all either a hoax or naturally explained. On my show that I did, I just started a web podcast myself called Classical Theology, and I responded to Answers in Genesis, who said that this is one person. They're not all going to hold this position necessarily, that everything can be explained naturally or through hoax. So there are people who take that position. I'm not saying he believes in the skeptical position. But the skeptical position will be, well, we can explain everything naturally. People are having hallucinations. People are having some kind of a substance problem and they're seeing things or whatever, or they're lying. So that's the skeptical view. Then you've got various well, the next view after that, I guess in my article I put as the extraterrestrial view, or the ETH,
Right.
the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is just that this is aliens. And that's that all this can be explained by alien beings traveling here from another planet and arriving here on Earth in various spaceships and that kind of thing.
And now, wherever planet they come from, they all tell us the same thing: Jesus isn't God.
Yes,
why are they compelled to make this one trip to tell us that message?
That's one of the questions about the theory that doesn't really make sense with the alien view. Is that why are the aliens so interested in our religion, and not just anti-religious in general, but very anti-Christian in particular? That's something that
interesting.
A lot of the contactees bring up, a lot of the abductees bring up. Yeah, and so that's one of the questions. So you have the alien view, or the ETH. Then you've got various interdimensional views, which be like, for example, Jacques Vallée, who holds that. And going back to the Spielberg's movie, The Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He is he's a real scientist, and he's portrayed in that movie as a French scientist. And Hynek actually has a cameo in there and was an advisor to Spielberg. Vallée thinks they're not aliens, but they are somehow physical beings that have been able to figure out how to maneuver between different space-time dimensions. And there are various takes on that. He also thinks that there's some kind of a psychic aspect to it, where they can control our thoughts and minds. They can kind of project what they want to project on the TV of our minds, so to speak, as he says in his book, Messengers of Deception. And then there's the spiritual view, which is basically what we're advocating for here, which is there is a real phenomena. It can be, and there's different takes on this as well. There can be physical effects or aspects of it, but at heart, it is spiritual in nature and it's demonic in nature, because we have, for example, many people saying that this is anti-Christian. They teach things that are clearly anti-biblical, specifically Christian, and they are very consistent with what we would expect with a demonic type oppression, possession. And that's not just what Christians are saying. Again, this is something that Keel says, John Keel, who's a well-known, he died, I think, about 10, 13 years ago. He was a paranormal investigator, did a lot with Mothman, UFOs. And he said there's a real spiritual aspect to this. And so that will be one of the other views as well. So that's the four views I talked about.
Isn't it interesting that in cultures that are open to the spiritual realm, I don't see too many UFO reports coming out of there. Do you?
Other countries,
like in India, like countries that have they're very open to the existence of the spiritual realm, the demons, gods, or whatever they have in Hinduism. And you will have reports of angelic encounters from these, but I don't hear too many UFO reports coming out of those cultures. But here, I don't hear too many angelic accounts or angelic encounters of the third kind. I hear these alien encounters, and it's like, wait a minute, why aren't they the same thing?
Yeah, you do see them around the world in various cultures and places.
Do you see them more now that they are becoming more, advanced technologically, as opposed to before, when they, 50 years ago?
Have there been more? There have. I want to argue that the sightings or the report. The problem with all this is we don't know how many there are, because we don't know how many people are not reporting. So Vallée says that at most we're probably getting about 10% of the reports, and that's what Hynek would say, and others, because people don't want to report. There's a stigma. I know somebody who has seen this. He knows other people who are pilots who have had encounters, and they don't want to talk still. So it's hard to get a number of how many are going on. There is a correlation, though, that's been shown between the occultic type involvement, spiritual type involvement, and sightings. Now, not everybody who has sightings are dabbling in the occult, but oftentimes there is some door there. And again, going back to the skinwalker thing, because I've just been reading this recently, so it's fresh in my mind. The people who went there and did their research and came home, they brought back what they called hitchhikers. So the family may not have been doing anything, but they were involved in this, whatever was going on at Skinwalker Ranch, came back home, and then they had these experiences. So children will have these experiences. They weren't in the occult per se, but their parents might have been, or there might have been some other door open. So there are these sightings. The numbers seem like they're going up, and they have been more going on since World War II, it seems. Although they do go back. So Wonders in the Sky is a good book on this topic, called by Jacques Vallée and Chris Auerbach. They talk about the various sightings across the world through time, and they change. I know Don mentioned earlier that these things kind of change based on the culture. So in China, they would oftentimes see dragons in the sky. They did sometimes see discs and things, but they are culturally appropriated, really. So, and Valley says this in Passport to Magonia. They really attach to what the culture would expect, and see this is a lot of similarities to the fairy religions in Ireland and that kind of thing. There's a lot of similarities there.
So if you're a let's say mid or early 20th century Hindu or Muslim, it might be more culturally acceptable for you to have had an encounter with an angel or a demon. But in early 20th century America, where War of the Worlds was a radio program that caused some people to jump off bridges, or whatever. Right. It's more acceptable to have an alien encounter,
right?
Something that's otherwise unexplainable.
Salvador, who I'm going to mention about something else in a moment, but he poses the idea of interdimensional beings. Will that fit with the notion of a multiverse?
Yeah, it could. So if people want to argue that there's this multiverse where there's however many universes there are, and you can maybe pop in and out of them, that would, as far as I understand, this is where I try to be careful, because I'm not a physicist. But it seems that would be consistent, and people who are physicists and astrophysicists are trying to make these kind of connections. Of course, there's problems with that, as other physicists like Hugh Ross say, because given relativity theory, you're pretty much locked from what he says. Because I'm not the expert he is. He says once you're in a dimension, you're pretty much locked into it. So I guess this is all really debated.
Well, right now, and it kind of just off topic slightly is we do know biblically that we've had angelic visitation,
right,
and Paul says that we have to be careful because we may entertain angels unaware,
right,
and I have often thought that angels have some physicality that's just different than ours, and maybe that's answered by the sphere in which they dwell is a different dimension, and God allows them to step into our dimension for particular tasks and then back out. So
yeah, they do seem to be able to take on the material aspect when they interact with people here on Earth, and they can cause.
Or maybe it is a material aspect that they already possess, that they are allowed then to be seen as they come into this dimension. Yeah. Possibly. I mean, when God opened the eyes of, I forget which of the assistants to one of the prophets, and he saw this army of angels surrounding them. Obviously, they were already physical, because the problem wasn't with their physicality, but was with his eyes. He couldn't see them until they were opened.
Well, I always thought that the fifth dimension sounded rather angelic in some of their.
Yeah, they have some great songs. Really.
Because, one of the things that we don't kind of in Western culture, it seems the spiritual and the idea of spirit itself is more associated with non-materiality, whereas in ancient cultures and Eastern cultures, it's more associated with power, invisible power. The idea the wind could be powerful. Of course, I live in Florida, so I know that. I saw it firsthand just a few months ago. But this is the concept. Spirit power is, the wind. You could see the effects of the wind and it's the same word in Greek and Hebrew and Latin are used for spirit and wind.
Right.
You know, so and the idea of it can move objects, and you don't see it if it's strong, if it comes through, strong enough. So so yeah, power. How does it get this power? Well, I don't know. If there's some kind of materiality in another dimension that God has created, I don't know.
Right.
All I know is that the way it relates to where our universe, our world is, it just kind of shows up and does stuff and then goes away.
Right. So Denver, which I had put up a few minutes ago, proposed that Satan uses different minions for different cultures, perhaps, which is one of the things we're kind of trying to sort out here. T.G. McCoy points out the airship, quote unquote, sightings of the Victorian era are an example of cultural perception. And that is one of the things that we had been talking about before we started. Is it strikes me as interesting that whatever these things are, if they're actually physical ships that are being built, no two are the same. So every one is handcrafted.
Right.
They're always slightly ahead of the available technology of the time in which they appear. They're always just a little faster and a little bit more out of reach than we can manage. And at the time we might be getting close to be able to catch them, say, in the air, they just go right underwater.
Right. Or just vanish. Yeah.
Or just vanish.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the arguments against the alien view, is that you would think that there being so many sightings would argue for it, but actually argues against it, according to what Valley says. And there's different crafts, different species of these kind of aliens.
Like the Klingons, the Romulans.
Yeah, those as well. You've got the Greys, the Nordics, you've got reptilian kinds, you've got all sorts of kinds. And it's interesting, and this is again interesting because that a naturalist like Valley says this, is that if you take God out of the equation, which many people do in this discussion, then you have to argue that evolution has given rise to these different beings naturally.
Right.
And Valley's point is, well, that's just not going to happen, where they have the same general anatomical structure, the ability to see on our wavelength, to be able to hear things. And that happened multiple times. That's just pretty much not going to happen. And so that he actually uses that as an argument against the alien view. But the many different ships, they would be coming from many different planets, presumably, different species and things. So it wouldn't just be a one time, these guys made it from this planet, this far away. It would be happening a lot from different places, which makes it even more improbable.
And as you point out, they're similar. As you look at all the variety of aliens that they propose, they have a common trait with humans. They have generally 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes.
They just look like more advanced. I mean, what some people at one time thought would be more evolutionarily advanced kinds of
right. I mean, they might be gender neutral or genderless or something like that, but basically pretty much the same. Maybe bigger heads because they got more advanced, bigger brains.
Right. Bigger. That was always in the mid 20th century, in the 1950s. It had to have bigger brain. And since they weren't using their muscles so much because everything was mechanized, they were kind of scrawnier, And so, what do the aliens in Close Encounters look like as they're coming off the ship? Pretty much the way you'd expect in 1950s. I used to read, fantasy and science fiction magazine. Now, of course, I read it in the 70s, and the artwork was more advanced, but. I've seen a lot of the covers from the 50s and 40s even of those sci-fi magazines, and they always had this, assumption of evolution occurring on other planets and how they expected us to look maybe 100,000 years from now.
Right.
So, yeah. It's interesting.
And evolution, and now just another, we like rabbit trails, by the way.
Good.
This is kind of one of my more favorite rabbit trails because one of the discoverers of DNA, Nelson Crick,
right,
who did not believe in God and was absolutely committed to evolution, recognized that it could not have happened on this planet, at least in the way that we think it is, and so he
in the space of time
somewhere else, and we have direct panspermia.
Panspermia, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I have the article somewhere in my files. I have to find it, but he talked about it. And really, the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey was maybe not exactly panspermia, but the idea that you need some alien intelligence to guide evolution along.
Yeah.
And then there was what was it? Was it called Pandora? I don't know. The movie where I guess I don't know the name of the movie, but there was an actual scene at the beginning of it where this alien drinks this poison or whatever or something, and he falls into the water on this barren earth, and his molecules divide up and become the building blocks for a human race that doesn't come along for a couple million years.
Oh, okay.
So I'm trying to remember the name of that movie, but
I don't know. I haven't seen that one.
So it's kind of in the.
But it wasn't a documentary, though. So.
Well, I don't know. They could have gone. You just never know, Don. They could have gone back in time. How do you know? Where's the burden of proof here? So can you prove it didn't happen? I love it when I get that one. Can you prove it didn't happen?
All right. So, what is your conclusion and importance? Conclusion and importance. Now, I really recommend everyone to read the article. It's not really long. It's not like a whole book length. So if you're not prone to reading, this is one I would say go to. It's really helpful. Before we do that, we have a couple of things on evolution. I opened up this other box. This is one of my favorite topics.
Okay.
Richard Dawkins agreed that intelligent design could be taught in the classroom as long as it is aliens seeding the planet. In the film
I almost brought that up. Yeah. He does say in the end of that documentary with Ben Stein, well, because he thinks that life looks designed. It has the appearance of design. He said, well, maybe it could be aliens or something like that, but then they would have to have another intelligence behind that as well.
Right.
And of course, that just pushes it back one step.
Exactly. It's kind of like dealing with Mormons. Who's the original God? Well, you can't get to that. It just goes back farther and farther and farther.
Right.
To infinity, so you can't really ever answer that. Evolution, skinny bodies, big brains, that's kind of what we're talking about with the aliens. So they are trying to make us assimilate like the Borg lately. That's kind of funny. So conclusion and importance. Why is any of this important?
Well, I used to wonder too, why would a demon want to make you think that aliens exist? I had a problem with that view. I just didn't think it made much sense. Then I started reading more about it. I watched the documentary called Unidentified, and we had a Christian there, for example, saying that he was in the military, he was deployed, he saw what he thought was a UFO, and according to him, it was a real faith shaker. And I've had people come and say, well, if these things do exist, doesn't that pose a problem for Christianity? That's one takeaway from it. Another is that, as someone mentioned, this poltergeist experience, and as Marcia says in her book Spellbound, there's a lot of draw in our culture to the paranormal, and so people will use UFOs and things to get into that door, and it can be very deceptive. And we have non-Christians like Jacques Vallée saying, and John Keel saying that these things are really deceptive and want to control your thoughts, and that's something worth listening to. And so, one, we need to be aware of what's really going on. I don't think the church is really touching on this topic as much as they should. And statistically, you probably either have seen a UFO or know someone who has, and the church is just not discussing it, in my opinion. And people are going elsewhere for answers, and they're getting answers in dangerous places. So this is a real issue. It's becoming more and more of an issue. We see this in the news. And so something that we need to be aware of, but not be taken into. As Keel said, you don't want to become obsessed with it or be taken in by it. So you want to be aware of it and know what's true about it.
You're touching on an important point that actually crosses a lot of other topics in the same way. I have spoken on this a lot. We've written on it a lot. This is one of the drums I pound pretty often. And that is, you have, I think, well-meaning pastors and elders that have bought into a commercialization kind of mentality. We need to broaden the market base to bring unbelievers in to sneak up on them with the gospel. The result of that is there is drastically little sound teaching in essential,
very little,
biblical doctrine. So that starts explaining things. I just spoke on this at the Evangelical Press Association and pointed out that pastors, well-meaning pastors, have a really hard job. They have to care for the flock. They have to prepare to teach on a weekly, sometimes, twice a week basis. They can't keep up with what's going on there.
Right.
Which means their task of guarding the flock kind of gets set aside. And what happens is the flock goes to other sources and then infiltrates it with viruses of false teaching.
Exactly.
Right. And there's no guard against that. And so I challenged the evangelical journalists. I said, in part, this is your guys' fault, because you have publishers that are publishing rank heresy, and you're giving the books good review. And the sheep who trust you as being theologically astute are buying books from Christian publishers that they believe have been theologically vetted, and all of that is false. So it's UFOs, and it's the Enneagram, and it's Bill Gothard, and it's Gwen Shamblin, and we could go down a whole list of false teachers and false teachings that have infiltrated the church because the pastors don't have sufficient time or training to keep up with all these trends.
Right. And I think on this topic too, they're afraid of scorn. They're afraid of the stigma as well. All what you said is true though, and it's they're going somewhere else for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's always a salesperson out there that will sell you what you want to believe.
That's right.
Well, Don, you and I go back to, Chariots of the Gods with Eric Von Däniken.
I had one, actually.
You had one of those chariots, or you had a book?
I did.
A copy of the book.
My mother did. My mother, I was raised as an atheist. My mother was, kind of an occultist, if you will. She liked Chariots of the Gods and believed it was true. She went to astrologers. She believed in astrology and
hardly anybody remembers Eric Von Däniken.
Mm-hmm.
Chariots of the Gods. He took the story of Elijah, going up to heaven on a chariot, and he said, "Well, that's really a story about a man named maybe Elijah being taken up on a space, an alien spaceship, and it just happened to find its way into our Bibles." So people are getting. Basically, that's an anti-biblical, anti-Christian explanation for the biblical text. I wonder if there's, some kind of demonic motivation going on here. Do you think?
Possibly, yeah. Possibly.
I would say yes. Well, Brian, I have thoroughly enjoyed our time together.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, we're going to want to see what other kinds of things that you're interested in doing and have you back on again.
By the way, before we go, I told you earlier, I was a big science fiction fan, and I just remembered I used to subscribe to one of those, I think it was called Fantasy and Science Fiction. And after the Eric Von Däniken thing hit and made a huge bestseller, one of the science fiction writers who obviously didn't give it any credibility whatsoever, wrote a satire piece where he's writing in the same kind of voice as Von Däniken. And he talks about all this evidence we have of past alien interaction. And he mentioned this clay sculpture of, from the Incas or something. And he says, right there, right in the middle of its stomach, we have a modern doorbell. And so it's obviously the product of aliens. He's basically making fun at the way Von Däniken presented his. I
just saw something like that 3 days ago. It's a statue, and in the statue, in this archway in which the statue or which this relief exists, has what looks like a space an astronaut with a cell phone. And so they're going, see, even in the 60s.
Obviously, that's what they must have been thinking.
When you track it down, what you discover is the guy who was doing repairs on this, every time he does repairs, he brings some currently available element into the reliefs that he's reproducing.
Yeah. Yes, there you go.
That's
But
the way to
thank you
do
for
it.
being with us, Brian Huffling, and putting up with us. So
I enjoyed it. Thank you very
we'll have to
much.
stick around a little more. We got more for you to put up with, right, Don?
We do. You're going to waltz us out of here, man.
Yes, let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, O.D. Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Joe Foley. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Director of Privacy Assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened.
Why is my copyright notice so far down on the screen? I gotta fix that. Well, anyways, thank you for being
You
willing